The emergency council chamber aboard the Galactic Union flagship Eternal Vigilance hummed with desperate energy. Representatives from 47 species sat in their specialized atmospheric pods, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony that the universal translators struggled to process. Admiral Zephytari of the Centaurian fleet pressed her six-fingered hands against the cool metal of the conference table, her blue-scaled skin shifting to darker hues as stress overtook her. The Devourers have consumed 17 more systems in the past galactic rotation, announced Councillor Vexhall, his crystalline body refracting the chamber's lights into prismatic warnings. Our combined fleets cannot match their expansion rate. At this pace, the core worlds will fall within 2 cycles. A collective shudder ran through the assembled representatives. The Devourers were unlike anything the galaxy had faced in its recorded history. They weren't conquerors or raiders seeking resources or territory. They were entropy given form, reality-eating entities that left nothing but void in their wake. Entire star systems simply ceased to exist after their passage, as if they had never been born from cosmic dust. Admiral Zephytari activated the holographic display at the chamber's center. The galactic map materialized, showing vast red zones where the Devourers had passed. The infected areas spread like cancer through the outer rim, consuming everything with methodical precision. Her voice carried the weight of countless lost worlds as she spoke. Our most advanced weapons pass through them like light through glass. Our energy shields might as well be soap bubbles. Even the ancient predecessor artifacts we've recovered from dead civilizations have proven useless. Nothing in our collective knowledge base has prepared us for enemies that exist partially outside conventional reality. Councillor Mordeth of the Hive Minds leaned forward, his insectoid features clicking with agitation. Perhaps we should consider the unthinkable options. The forbidden weapons our ancestors sealed away for good reason. You speak of planet killers and reality scramblers, growled Ambassador Theknor, her ursine features twisted with disgust. Such weapons would make us no different from the Devourers themselves. We would become destroyers of worlds in our desperate attempt to save them. The debate that followed had been repeated in various forms across dozens of these emergency sessions. Every military strategy had been attempted and found wanting. Every scientific breakthrough had proven insufficient. The galaxy's greatest minds had exhausted their conventional options, and the unconventional ones threatened to destroy everything they were trying to protect. In the midst of this escalating argument, a soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The chamber fell silent as Communications Officer Yilandra materialized the message in the air above them. The speaker was Elder Keth Moran of the Archaeological Guild, his ancient features bearing the weight of eons spent studying dead civilizations. Esteemed council members, I believe I have found something in the predecessor archives that may offer hope. However, what I'm about to share will sound impossible to most of your species. In the deepest vaults of the Andromeda Archive Station, we've discovered references to a species that even the predecessors treated with something approaching reverence. Admiral Zephytari's scales shifted to curious yellow patterns. The predecessors had been the most advanced civilization in known galactic history, their technology so far beyond current understanding that their simplest tools were considered miraculous artifacts. The idea that they revered any species was almost incomprehensible. Elder Kethmaran continued, his voice carrying across dimensions through the quantum communicator. The translations are fragmentary, but the pattern is consistent across multiple sites. These beings are referred to as the Acknowledgement, though that appears to be a rough translation. More interesting are the descriptive phrases, those whom the cosmos itself recognizes, the species that existence cannot deny, and most puzzling of all, the ones who argue with reality and win. Councillor Vexahal's crystalline form pulsed with skeptical energy. Elder Kethmoran, While we respect your scholarship, we need practical solutions, not ancient mythology. The Devourers advance with each moment we waste on fairy tales. I understand your skepticism, Counselor, but consider this. Every reference we've found indicates these beings exist in a region the predecessors marked as forbidden territory. They called it the persistence zone, and their warnings suggest it contains something that could unmake their unmaking if properly approached. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some representatives dismissed the information as desperate grasping at ancient superstitions. Others argued that their situation was so dire that even impossible solutions deserved investigation. Admiral Zeftari raised her hand for silence, her command presence cutting through the chaos. Elder Kethmoran, do we have coordinates for this persistence zone? We do, Admiral. It's located in what your current star charts label as Sector Omega-7, approximately 47,000 light-years from our current position. Our deep space reconnaissance probes have always reported unusual readings from that region, but we attributed them to natural phenomena. Ambassador Theknor stood, her massive frame commanding attention. Even if we could reach this mythical species, what makes you think they would help us? Advanced civilizations rarely involve themselves in the affairs of lesser beings. Elder Kethmoran's voice took on an odd quality, as if he were reading from something that unsettled him. According to these archives, it's not about advancement or power. The predecessors described them as guardians of the possible, beings who fight against anything that threatens existence itself. They apparently view the preservation of reality as a personal responsibility. The implications hung heavy in the recycled air of the chamber. A species that fought to preserve existence itself would certainly oppose something like the Devourers. But the logistics of reaching them, let alone convincing them to help, seemed overwhelming. How long would it take to reach this persistence zone? Admiral Zeftari asked, her tactical mind already calculating possibilities. With our fastest ships and emergency jump protocols, perhaps 15 days. However, the energy signature from that region suggests their space-time is highly unstable. Navigation would be extremely dangerous, and there's no guarantee our ships could survive the transition into their territory. Counselor Vexhal's form dimmed with resignation. 15 days. The Devourers will consume at least 6 more systems in that time. Millions of lives lost while we chase ancient legends. Millions more if we don't, Admiral Zeftari replied firmly. Elder Kethmoran, can you provide us with everything you've discovered about these beings? Every fragment, every reference, every clue about how to approach them. I'm transmitting all data now, Admiral. There's one more thing the archives mention that might be crucial. The predecessors never actually met these beings directly. All contact was conducted through intermediaries they called speakers. These speakers apparently possessed some unique quality that allowed them to communicate across species barriers that even universal translators couldn't bridge. The data download completed, filling the chamber's computers with tens of thousands of pages of translated predecessor texts, archaeological notes, and theoretical analyses. As the representatives began reviewing the information, patterns emerged that were both encouraging and terrifying. The beings in the persistent zone didn't seem to operate under the same physical laws that governed the rest of the galaxy. They existed in a state of constant flux, neither fully material nor energy, but somehow both simultaneously. Their technology wasn't built so much as convinced to exist, shaped by will and necessity rather than conventional engineering principles. Look at this passage, Counselor Mordeth announced, his hive mind processing the data at incredible speed. The predecessors describe witnessing these beings deny the denial of existence when facing something called the gray silence. They apparently convinced reality that the attacking force had never existed, and so it simply stopped. Admiral Zeftari felt a chill run through her scales. The power to convince reality itself to change its mind was beyond anything in galactic experience. It was the kind of ability that could indeed face the Devourers on equal terms. But it also represented a level of power that could be catastrophically dangerous if turned against them. We're talking about beings who treat the fundamental laws of physics as suggestions, Ambassador Theknor observed grimly. What guarantee do we have that they won't view us as just another form of entropy to be eliminated? Elder Kethmoran's voice carried a note of strange hope. The archives suggest they have a deep appreciation for diversity and persistence. The predecessors described them as collectors of possibilities, beings who value every unique form of existence. Their conflict seems to be specifically with forces of absolute destruction. The debate continued for hours as representatives grappled with the implications. Some argued for immediate action, pointing out that conventional resistance had already failed. Others counseled caution, noting that seeking help from beings who could rewrite reality was potentially suicidal. A few suggested that perhaps extinction was preferable to placing their fate in the hands of incomprehensible entities. Finally, Admiral Zeftari called for a formal vote. The question before us is simple. Do we attempt contact with these mysterious beings, knowing the risks, or do we continue fighting a war we cannot win with weapons that cannot touch our enemies? The voting was close, but desperation ultimately trumped caution. 24 species voted in favor of the mission, 20 voted against, and 3 abstained. It wasn't an overwhelming mandate, but it was enough. "I'll take the fastest ship we have," Admiral Zeftari announced. "The journey will require a small crew and minimal resources to maximize speed. We'll establish contact and determine if these beings are willing and able to help us." Counselor Vexahal's form pulsed with worried energy. "And if they refuse? Or if they decide we're part of the problem?" Admiral Zeftari's scales shifted to determined red patterns. "Then we'll have tried everything possible. But I refuse to let our galaxy die without exhausting every option, no matter how unlikely." As the council session ended, representatives dispersed to their ships with heavy hearts and desperate hopes. The Admiral began immediate preparations for what would either be their salvation or their final gamble. The crew selection alone would be crucial, as they would need individuals capable of maintaining sanity while communicating with beings who operated outside conventional reality. The Swift Certainty was the Union's fastest reconnaissance vessel, built for long-range exploration and equipped with the most advanced sensors available. Admiral Zeftari selected a crew of 12, each chosen for their psychological stability and diverse skill sets. They would need scientists, diplomats, and soldiers, but more importantly, they would need individuals who could think beyond the limitations of their species' worldview. Dr. Halvorin, the Union's leading expert on xenopsychology, would serve as primary contact specialist. Engineer Colmiran brought unparalleled expertise in exotic propulsion systems that might function in distorted space-time. Navigator Yassarian had successfully guided ships through the galaxy's most dangerous regions, including several expeditions into areas where normal physics didn't apply. As the ship prepared for departure, reports continued arriving of new Devourer incursions. The entities had consumed the entire Chronos system in the time it took to plan the mission. 3 billion souls simply ceased to exist, along with their planets, their sun, and their history. The urgency was becoming unbearable. "Admiral," Communications Officer Naltara reported from the bridge, "we're receiving final clearance for departure. All available fleet resources are being diverted to slow the Devourer advance. But our tactical computers estimate we have perhaps 10 days before they reach the first core world." Admiral Zeftari took her position in the captain's chair, feeling the weight of galactic civilization pressing down on her shoulders. Every choice from this point forward would echo across the galaxy's future, assuming it had one. All stations report ready for hyperspace transition, Engineer Colmiran announced. Jump calculations complete for the first waypoint. Admiral, I should mention that our route will take us through several regions of space where our sensors detect reality distortions. We may experience temporal anomalies or space-time fluctuations. Understood. Begin the jump sequence. The swift certainty shuddered as its exotic matter cores engaged, tearing a hole through conventional space-time. The stars outside shifted from points of light to streaming ribbons of energy as the ship accelerated beyond the speed of causality. In normal circumstances, such a journey would be routine, even boring. But these weren't normal circumstances, and their destination was anything but routine. They were traveling toward beings that even the most advanced civilization in galactic history had treated with reverence and fear. The next 15 days would determine whether the galaxy would survive or whether they would all fade into the same void that had claimed so many worlds. Admiral Zeftari stared at the streaming stars outside and wondered if they were sailing toward salvation or hastening their own end. In either case, the die was cast, and the galaxy's fate now rested with species that existed beyond the normal boundaries of reality itself. The swift certainty emerged from hyperspace with alarms screaming across every console. The ship's hull groaned under stresses that shouldn't have been possible, and the main display showed readings that made no sense according to any known laws of physics. Outside the viewports, space itself seemed to ripple like water disturbed by an invisible hand. "Engineering report," Admiral Zeftari called out, gripping her command chair as gravity fluctuated wildly around them. Engineer Colmiran's voice came through the intercom, strained with effort. "Admiral, our instruments are reading negative mass in some areas, positive infinity in others. The ship's chronometer says we've been here for 3 days, but my personal timepiece shows we just arrived. Whatever this region of space is, it doesn't follow standard physical laws." Dr. Halvran stumbled onto the bridge, his normally pristine appearance disheveled. "Admiral, I'm detecting massive psionic emanations from multiple points around us. Not hostile exactly, but intensely curious. Something is scanning us with techniques I've never encountered." Navigator Yassarian worked frantically at her station, trying to make sense of the sensor readings. "Admiral, I'm detecting artificial structures, but they're not fixed in space. They appear to be moving through dimensions we can't properly perceive. Some of them are larger than gas giants, others smaller than atoms, but somehow occupying the same coordinates." The main view screen flickered, and for a moment, Admiral Zeftari thought she saw something impossible. The stars outside arranged themselves into patterns that looked almost like writing, spelling out messages in a language that existed more as feeling than symbols. Then the display returned to normal, leaving her wondering if she had imagined the entire thing. "Incoming transmission," announced Communications Officer Naltara, though her expression was puzzled. "I'm not sure how to describe it, Admiral. The signal isn't using any known protocols, but somehow our universal translators are processing it. It's as if the message is translating itself." "Put it through." The bridge filled with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. It spoke in perfectly clear Standard Galactic, but underneath the words was something else entirely. Music that described the birth of stars, mathematics that painted emotional landscapes, concepts that existed in the spaces between thoughts. "Visitors from the galaxy of standard causality, you travel with the weight of extinction upon you. Your desperation tastes of copper and burned worlds. Why do you seek the persistence zone when your kind has always feared what lies beyond comprehension?" Admiral Zeftari stood slowly, feeling the full attention of something vast and alien focusing on her. "I am Admiral Zeftari of the Galactic Union. We seek an audience with those the ancient predecessors called the Acknowledgement. Our galaxy faces destruction by entities that consume existence itself. We've exhausted all conventional options. The presence seemed to consider this, and during the pause, the ship's chronometers began displaying times from across the electromagnetic spectrum. Past, present, and future seemed to blur together in the entity's consideration. The predecessors? Yes, we remember them. Curious beings who built wonders but could never accept that reality is more flexible than their equations suggested. They called us the Acknowledgement because we acknowledge all possibilities, even the impossible ones. But you seek humans, do you not? The species that argues with existence and convinces it to change its mind? Admiral Zeftari felt her scales shift to confused patterns. Humans? I'm not familiar with that species designation. We seek aid against the Devourers, entities that unmake reality itself. The presence laughed, and the sound was like neutron stars spinning in harmony. Of course you're not familiar with them. They exist in the margins of possibility, in the spaces where other species fear to tread. They are the ones who look at the impossible and say, "Watch this. Follow our guidance, Admiral of the Scaled People. We will take you to the humans, though we warn you, they are not what you expect beings capable of cosmic intervention to be." The swift certainty found itself moving without engaging its engines. Space folded around them in ways that made the crew's heads spin, carrying them towards something that registered on sensors as simultaneously massive and tiny, ancient and newly born. The ship's artificial intelligence began muttering to itself in mathematical equations that described impossible geometries. "Admiral," Dr. Halvarin said quietly, "my readings suggest we're approaching a planet that shouldn't be able to exist. It's orbiting 3 stars simultaneously, has gravity that points in 17 different directions, and according to my instruments, it's been inhabited for both 50,000 years and 17 minutes. As they approached their destination, details became more confusing rather than clearer. The planet's surface showed vast cities that seemed grown rather than built, technology that looked more like art than machinery, and energy patterns that suggested the inhabitants powered their civilization through controlled applications of pure stubbornness. "Admiral, I'm detecting massive technological signatures across the planet's surface," Navigator Yossarian reported. "But the technology appears to be arguing with itself, as if different pieces of equipment are debating their function before deciding what to do." The landing was guided by the same invisible presence that had brought them here. They touched down in what appeared to be a spaceport, though the landing pad was made of crystallized time, and the control tower kept shifting between being a building and being a very tall, very confused giraffe. Admiral Zeftari selected a small landing party. Dr. Halvarin for his xenopsychology expertise, Engineer Colmiran in case technical discussions arose, and Communications Officer Naltara to handle any translation issues. As they approached the airlock, their environmental suits registered that the atmosphere outside was not only breathable, but actually optimized for their specific physiological needs. The beings waiting for them outside defied every expectation Admiral Zeftari had formed. They were bipedal, roughly her height, with pale skin and strange hair growing from their heads. They wore simple clothing and carried equipment that looked primitive compared to galactic standard technology. But her instruments screamed warnings about massive energy readings emanating from these seemingly fragile creatures. One of them stepped forward, a female with short brown hair and eyes that seemed to see too much. When she spoke, it was in perfect standard galactic, though Admiral Zeftari was certain the universal translator wasn't functioning. "Welcome to Earth, Admiral Zeftari. I'm Dr. Sarah Chin, and I understand you're having some trouble with entities that eat reality. Don't worry, we've dealt with worse. Last month, my neighbor convinced Entropy to run backwards because his garbage disposal wasn't working properly." Dr. Halvarin's instruments were registering impossible readings. These humans showed no signs of advanced genetic modification, no artificial enhancement, no exotic technology integration. Yet something about them made reality itself seem more solid, as if their mere presence convinced the universe to make more sense. Dr. Chen, we were told your species might be able to help us against the Devourers, but I must confess, I don't understand how. You appear to be technologically inferior to most galactic civilizations. Dr. Chen smiled, and Admiral Zeftari noticed that when she did, the local space-time distortions calmed slightly. Technology is one way to solve problems, but humans have always preferred a more direct approach. We don't like to accept impossible as an answer. Come on, let me show you our research facility. Fair warning, though, some of our experiments are still running, so try not to think too hard about what you're seeing. As they walked through the human city, Admiral Zeftari struggled to process what her senses were telling her. The buildings looked normal enough, but they somehow managed to be bigger on the inside than the outside without any obvious spatial folding technology. Gardens grew plants that photosynthesized pure mathematics, creating flowers that bloomed in colors that didn't exist. Citizens went about their daily lives with casual disregard for impossible things happening around them. A human child was playing with a ball that bounced in 4 dimensions simultaneously. An elderly man was reading a newspaper that reported news from 17 different possible timelines. A group of teenagers had convinced gravity to work sideways so they could walk on the walls of buildings. The key, Dr. Chen explained as they walked, is that humans never really accepted that reality has to follow rules. Other species discover physical laws and then work within them. Humans discover physical laws and then argue with them until they agree to be more flexible. Engineer Colmiran spoke up, his voice filled with professional bewilderment. Dr. Chen, our sensors detect massive energy expenditures across your city, but we can't identify the power sources. How do you fuel technology that violates thermodynamics? Oh, we don't violate thermodynamics, Dr. Chen replied cheerfully. We just convinced it that conservation of energy is more of a guideline than a law. Turns out if you ask nicely and present a compelling argument, the universe is surprisingly willing to make exceptions. They arrived at a building that Admiral Zeftari's eyes refused to focus on properly. It existed in a state of architectural uncertainty, as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be when it grew up. The sign outside read, Department of Applied Impossibility, in letters that somehow managed to be written in every language simultaneously. Inside, human scientists worked on projects that made Admiral Zeftari's head hurt. One team was building a machine designed to run on paradoxes. Another group was breeding domesticated quantum mechanics that could be trained to perform useful tasks. In one corner, a lone researcher was having an animated argument with the concept of inevitability, apparently winning. The Devourers, Dr. Chen said, leading them to a conference room that was bigger than the building it was in, are essentially antibodies for reality. They appear when the universe thinks something has gone too wrong to fix. The problem is, they're not very good at distinguishing between wrong and creative. Admiral Zeftari felt hope beginning to stir in her chest. You've encountered them before? Oh, yes. They showed up about 50 years ago when our species first started seriously arguing with physics. They consumed our entire solar system before we figured out how to deal with them. Dr. Chen gestured to a wall display that showed what appeared to be their solar system, intact and functioning normally. Communications Officer Naltara's voice was barely a whisper. But if they consumed your solar system, how are we here? We convinced the universe that it had made a mistake. Took about 6 months of concentrated arguing, but eventually reality agreed that our solar system was too interesting to erase. The Devourers were rather embarrassed about the whole thing. They don't like making existential errors. Dr. Halvorin was frantically taking notes. his xenopsychology training struggling to process beings who treated cosmic forces like neighborhood disputes. How exactly does one convince the universe it made a mistake? Dr. Chen's smile became slightly predatory. Very carefully and with excellent documentation, reality is surprisingly bureaucratic once you get past the surface layer of physical laws. Everything has to be properly filed, all the paperwork needs to be in triplicate, and you absolutely must speak to the right manager. She led them to another room where a team of humans was working on what appeared to be weapons designed to fight abstract concepts. Admiral Zeftari watched in fascination as they tested bullets made of crystallized logic against targets representing various forms of existential dread. The thing about the Devourers, Dr. Chen continued, is that they're not really malicious. They're just doing their job, which is cleaning up reality when it gets too messy. The trick is convincing them that the mess is actually a feature, not a bug. But how do we reach them? Admiral Zeftari asked. They consume everything they touch. Our fleets can't even engage them in conventional battle. You don't fight the Devourers, Dr. Chen replied. You debate them. You present your case for why existence is interesting enough to preserve. You show them that consciousness, creativity, and chaos are valuable additions to reality, rather than problems to be solved. She pulled up a holographic display showing the current Devourer positions in Admiral Zeftari's galaxy. The red zones of consumption were vast, but Dr. Chen studied them with the calm confidence of someone who had faced cosmic extinction and won. We'll need to set up a communication grid, Dr. Chen mused. Something that can broadcast across reality layers, not just through normal space. The Devourers don't actually hear words so much as they perceive the underlying concepts and intentions. Admiral Zeftari felt her scales shifting to hopeful blue patterns for the first time in months. Dr. Chen, are you saying you'll help us? That your species will intervene against the Devourers? Dr. Chen looked at her with surprise. Of course we'll help. That's what humans do. We see a problem, we argue with it until it stops being a problem. Besides, your galaxy sounds interesting, and interesting things should be preserved. As if summoned by their conversation, alarms began sounding across the research facility. Dr. Chen checked a device that appeared to be a smartphone crossed with a metaphysical calculator and frowned slightly. Speak of the devils, we've got incoming Devourers, about 17 light years out. They must have noticed our conversation about them. Devourers are very sensitive about being discussed behind their backs. She looked up at Admiral Zeftari with a reassuring smile. Don't worry. This is actually perfect timing. You'll get to see how we handle cosmic antibodies firsthand. Admiral Zeftari felt her hope wavering. The Devourers had consumed entire fleets without pause. How could one small planet stand against entities that unmade reality itself? Dr. Chen seemed to read her thoughts. Admiral, I want you to remember something important. Humans didn't become the species that argues with reality by accepting limitations. We became that species by refusing to accept them, watch, and learn. As alerts continued sounding across the facility, human scientists and technicians moved with calm efficiency. They weren't preparing for battle in any conventional sense. Instead, they were preparing for the universe's most important debate, armed with logic, creativity, and the absolute certainty that existence was worth fighting for. The human response to approaching cosmic annihilation was unlike anything Admiral Zeftari had ever witnessed. While her own species would have mobilized fleets and prepared defensive positions, the humans gathered in what they called a conference room and began setting up what appeared to be the galaxy's most important business meeting. Dr. Chen moved with practiced efficiency, directing teams of scientists and technicians as they assembled equipment that defied classification. One device looked like a telephone booth crossed with a particle accelerator. Another resembled a whiteboard that extended into dimensions Admiral Zeftari couldn't properly perceive. Most confusing of all was what the humans referred to as their PowerPoint cannon, which seemed to fire presentations directly at abstract concepts. "Admiral," Dr. Chen said as she calibrated a machine that appeared to run on pure stubbornness, "I need you to understand what we're about to do. We're not going to fight the Devourers. We're going to give them the most comprehensive presentation on the value of existence that's ever been compiled. Think of it as the universe's ultimate performance review." Communications Officer Naltara was frantically adjusting her equipment to interface with human technology. "Dr. Chen, our instruments are detecting massive reality distortions approaching our position. The Devourers will arrive within the hour. How can a presentation stop entities that exist partially outside conventional space-time?" A young human technician looked up from his work assembling what appeared to be a lectern made of crystallized mathematics. "Ma'am, you have to understand that Devourers aren't really entities. They're more like cosmic quality assurance programs. They show up when reality gets too weird and try to restore baseline normal. The trick is convincing them that weird is actually an improvement." Dr. Hal Varon was studying his instruments with growing amazement. "The energy readings from this facility are off every scale we have. How are you generating this much power without any visible reactors or exotic matter cores?" "Determination," replied Dr. Chen simply. "Humans run on determination the way other species run on fusion reactors. We've learned to weaponize our refusal to give up. It's remarkably efficient once you get the hang of it." As the humans made their final preparations, Admiral Zeftari received an emergency transmission from the Swift Certainty. Engineer Colmiran's voice carried across the communication link with barely controlled panic. "Admiral, our long-range sensors are detecting massive space-time distortions across this entire system. Whatever the humans are preparing to do, it's already affecting reality on a stellar scale. Also, I'm getting reports from the galactic communication grid that the Devourers have accelerated their advance. They've consumed 4 more systems in the past 6 hours. Dr. Chen overheard the transmission and nodded grimly. "They know something's happening here. Devourers are surprisingly well-informed for cosmic janitors. They're trying to finish their work before we can interfere." She activated several more devices, each one humming with energies that made reality itself seem more solid. Time to show them why humanity's greatest export is hope. The presentation began not with words, but with music. Human composers had apparently spent decades creating symphonies that described the mathematical beauty of consciousness, the elegant complexity of evolution, and the profound importance of asking, "What if?" The music wasn't heard so much as felt, vibrating through dimensions that existed between thought and reality. "Honorable Cosmic Quality Assurance Division," Dr. Chen spoke into a microphone that broadcast across layers of existence most species couldn't perceive. "We respectfully request a formal review of your current galactic sterilization project. We believe there may have been some classification errors in your threat assessment." The response came as a presence that pressed against the edges of perception, ancient and implacable. When the Devourers spoke, their voice was the sound of entropy made audible, the whisper of heat, death itself. "Entities of probability violation. Your species represents maximum deviation from baseline reality. Preparation for corrective deletion initiated." Dr. Chen smiled and activated her PowerPoint cannon. The first slide materialized in the space between dimensions, visible to beings who existed partially outside conventional reality. It was titled, "Consciousness, Feature, or Bug? A Comprehensive Analysis." "With respect, honored Devourers, we believe your assessment requires updating. Our research indicates that consciousness isn't a reality bug, but rather a feature that improves overall universal performance. Allow us to present our evidence." What followed was the most surreal academic presentation in galactic history. Dr. Chen and her team systematically argued that intelligence, creativity, and the tendency to question impossible things actually made reality more stable, not less. They presented charts showing how conscious beings served as distributed processors for cosmic problems. They demonstrated how art and music created new forms of mathematical beauty that enriched the underlying structure of existence. Admiral Zeftari watched in fascination as the humans treated cosmic forces like a corporate boardroom that needed convincing. They had pie charts showing the economic value of hope, flowcharts demonstrating the efficiency benefits of curiosity, and statistical analyses proving that love actually improved the thermodynamic efficiency of star formation. "Irrelevant data," the Devourers responded, though Admiral Zeftari thought she detected a note of uncertainty in their cosmic voice. "Probability violations require correction. Chaos parameters exceed acceptable limits." "Ah," said Dr. Chen, advancing to her next slide, "but that's where you're making a fundamental error in your threat assessment. You're treating chaos as a problem when it's actually a solution. Allow me to demonstrate." She gestured to one of her colleagues. A cheerful-looking man who introduced himself as Professor Williams, head of Applied Impossibility. He activated a device that looked like a coffee machine crossed with a hadron collider. "Devourers, distinguished cosmic auditors, observe this demonstration of constructive chaos," Professor Williams announced. He poured what appeared to be regular coffee into the machine, which then proceeded to violate several fundamental laws of physics while producing a cup of liquid that somehow contained more energy than had been put into the system. As you can see, when properly channeled, chaos doesn't decrease universal efficiency. It increases it. Conscious beings don't just violate reality's rules. They convince reality that those rules could be improved. This leads to innovation, growth, and enhanced cosmic performance metrics. The Devourer's presence wavered, and Admiral Zeftari felt the massive reality distortions around the planet beginning to stabilize. The humans were actually making headway in their impossible debate. "Consciousness parameters remain problematic," the Devourers stated, but their voice carried less certainty than before. "Unpredictable variables compromise system stability." Dr. Chen advanced to her final presentation section, titled, "Why Unpredictability is Actually the Point." She gestured to Admiral Zeftari and her team, who suddenly found themselves part of the cosmic PowerPoint presentation. "Honored Devourers, consider these beings from the Galactic Union. 47 different species, each one a unique solution to the problem of existence. Each one asks different questions, solves different problems, creates different forms of beauty. Eliminating them doesn't solve chaos. It eliminates the very thing that makes existence worth maintaining." The humans then did something that Admiral Zeftari would remember for the rest of her life. They began singing, not just Dr. Chen and her team, but apparently every human on the planet. The song wasn't in any language Admiral Zeftari recognized, but somehow she understood every word. It was about small moments of joy, about the satisfaction of solving impossible problems, about the beauty of watching stars being born and the bittersweet wonder of watching them die. More importantly, it was about the absolute refusal to accept that existence was meaningless, that consciousness was a cosmic accident, or that the universe would be better off empty and sterile. The Devourer's response shook the foundations of local space-time. Emotional manipulation detected. Logic circuits experiencing interference, requesting clarification on purpose of preservation. Dr. Chen's smile was radiant. "The purpose isn't preservation, honored auditors. The purpose is possibility. Every conscious being, every moment of awareness, every act of creativity adds new possibilities to reality. When you eliminate consciousness, you're not cleaning up the universe. You're limiting its potential." She activated one final device, something that looked like a telescope pointed at abstract concepts. Allow us to show you what the universe looks like from our perspective, not as a system to be maintained, but as a work of art being continuously created. The display that materialized defied description. It showed reality not as fixed laws and predictable patterns, but as an infinite canvas where every conscious thought added new colors, every creative act painted new landscapes, and every moment of hope sketched new possibilities into existence. Admiral Zeffatari felt tears on her cheeks as she saw her own galaxy through human eyes. Every world the Devourers had consumed wasn't just matter and energy. It was billions of unique perspectives, irreplaceable ways of understanding existence, lost songs that would never again be sung to the stars. The silence that followed stretched across dimensions. When the Devourers finally spoke, their voice had changed, carrying harmonics that hadn't been there before. Recalibration required. Consciousness parameters reclassified from system error to emergent feature. Deletion protocols suspended pending further review. Dr. Chen nodded professionally. Thank you for your time, honored auditors. We'll be happy to provide additional documentation if needed. We also have a proposal for an ongoing consultation arrangement. Humans have gotten quite good at distinguishing between beneficial chaos and actual threats to reality. Proposal under consideration. Withdrawal of forces initiated. Warning. Future reality. Violations must be submitted for approval through proper channels. As the massive presence of the Devourers began to recede, Admiral Zeffatari felt the universe itself seem to exhale in relief. Across her galaxy, consumed worlds began to flicker back into existence as cosmic antibodies retreated, and reality restored itself to include all the possibilities that had been temporarily deleted. Dr. Chen turned to Admiral Zeffatari with the satisfied expression of someone who had just successfully argued with entropy and won. That should take care of your Devourer problem. They'll be restoring all the consumed systems over the next few days. Fair warning, though, some things might be slightly different when they come back. Reality has a tendency to improve things when it gets a second chance. Admiral Zeffatari struggled to process what she had just witnessed. Dr. Chen, your species just convinced cosmic forces to change their fundamental operating procedures through a presentation? Well, it was a really good presentation. Dr. Chen replied modestly. We've been practicing. You'd be amazed how often cosmic problems can be solved with proper documentation and a compelling argument. Communications Officer Naltara was receiving reports from across the galaxy as the communication grid came back online. Admiral, I'm getting confirmations from 17 sectors. Consumed systems are reappearing. The Devourers are actually apologizing? Professor Williams looked up from his impossible coffee machine with interest. Oh, they always apologize when they realize they've made an error. Very professional, the Devourers. Bit overzealous sometimes, but their hearts are in the right place. As Admiral Zeffatari prepared to return to her ship and share the impossible news with the Galactic Union, Dr. Chen handed her a small device that looked like a smartphone crossed with a prayer wheel. Emergency contact, Dr. Chen explained. If you run into any other cosmic problems, just give us a call. Humans are always happy to help. It's what we do. We see problems that seem impossible to solve, and then we solve them anyway. Admiral Zeffatari took the device with hands that still trembled slightly from the magnitude of what she had witnessed. Dr. Chen, why do you do it? Why do humans involve themselves in cosmic affairs that most species would consider beyond their concern? Dr. Chen's answer was simple, delivered with the casual confidence of a species that had looked at the heat death of the universe and decided it needed better marketing. Because someone has to. Because existence is too important to leave to automatic processes. Because consciousness, creativity, and the ability to ask what if are the most precious things in reality. And because humans have never been very good at accepting impossible as a final answer. As the swift certainty departed the human system, Admiral Zeffetari watched through the viewports as Earth continued its impossible orbit around 3 stars simultaneously. Human children were still playing with balls that bounced in 4 dimensions. Human scientists were still having arguments with the fundamental forces of nature. Human artists were still convincing reality to be more beautiful than physics strictly allowed. The emergency transmission she sent to the Galactic Union would change everything. Humanity would be invited to join the galactic community, though they would probably argue with most of the membership requirements until the Union agreed to make them more interesting. Human consultants would be assigned to mediate future cosmic disputes. Human philosophers would be asked to review universal constants and suggest improvements. But most importantly, the galaxy now knew that when existence itself was threatened, when all hope seemed lost and impossible problems demanded impossible solutions, there was a species that looked at cosmic forces and said, "Let's talk about this like reasonable beings." The humans had done something no other species in galactic history had managed. They had convinced the universe itself to be better than it was. And that, Admiral Zeffetari reflected as the stars streamed past, was the most human thing of all.